Many people talk about the ups and downs of married life, but no one really prepares you for life after your spouse passes away. Welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Dr. Tina, a safe place for widows, widowers, and their friends and family to talk about love and loss. Find comfort as you listen to honest conversations between Dr. Tina and invited guests who've experienced the loss of their forever partner, share their stories of love, grief, and healing. You are not alone in this journey. Join today's episode and discover a wealth of resources and learn how to connect with others who are traveling the same path. This is Widowhood Real Talk with Dr. Tina.
Widowhood Real Talk with Dr. Tina is more than a podcast. We are an entire 501c3 nonprofit, and one of our favorite programs is Children of Widowhood Secret Santa. This allows us to help children who have lost one or both of their parents, and that process is done by the remaining parent or guardian applying on their behalf. Going to our website, widowhoodrealtalkwithtina.org, selecting events in the drop-down menu, and then select Children of Widowhood Secret Santa. Apply between June 1st and June 30th of 2026. This allows us to help and sponsor you. If you are an individual, organization, book club, or group that would like to sponsor a child or entire family, please email me at widowhoodrealtalk@gmail.com. This is our opportunity to take this podcast on an individual basis to people who need to know we are here and you are not on this journey alone. Widowhood. What happens when you meet a young widower that has financial background? How could that change your journey? How could his understanding, his lived experience help you? That's what we're going to find out in this conversation with Daniel. Let's get into the discussion now. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to the Widowhood.
I'm so glad to be here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share.
So welcome to the Widowhood. If we were to see the ticker tape of the translation in your head, what would that look like?
Yeah, it certainly brings back the memories of my personal journey when as a caregiver to my wife, Sarah. We ultimately were married for about 5 years, the last 2 of which I was her full-time caregiver, trying to balance that with my active duty career. And ultimately, she came home to hospice. Before that, we lived in hospitals for the prior 6 months. And then, she died in August of 2017. So, it just brings that back, what that was like as a caregiver, what that was like as a young widower. I was 31 when she died. And now in this work, bringing up many other people's stories that I've gotten a chance to work with and help other younger widow spouses on their journey too.
Yeah, you said all that in less than 2 minutes. Like that was a whole conversation right there.
Yeah. There was a lot more. That's the short version.
I was expecting to do it all like right there. So let's roll this back a little bit.
Yeah.
Your wife's name again?
Sarah.
Passed what year?
2017.
Our spouse passed the same year.
Wow. I didn't even realize that until just now.
9 years.
Yeah.
That's a lot you said in one sentence, so I know you've learned to say that. But I don't want to undermine the cost for you to be able to make that statement and how much of your life has been involved in that timeline.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when we're able to say something without being emotionally distraught at the moment we're saying it, that people underestimate how it impacts us. So I don't want to just roll past that.
Yeah.
When you think of your life then, as you sit here in this conversation, what does that look like to you now?
Time helps. Time doesn't necessarily heal, but it helps, right?
Okay.
I remember at one point, probably early on, maybe about 6 to 12 months into the grief journey, I encountered an image, and I'll try to describe it here. Maybe some of the listeners have already seen it, which is the idea that in those early dark days of grief, right, it's this giant mass that feels overwhelming. Like if your life is a circle, the mass of grief fills almost every area. Maybe you're just a tiny little bit at the top of the circle where, it's not grief, but otherwise it's so overwhelming. And it can feel early on, and I certainly felt that, the brain fog, the confusion, the social isolation, awkwardness of people not knowing what to say, especially in that season of life. I didn't know anyone else who'd ever been widowed at such a young age. And so friendships pulling back, everything that goes along with that. And then there's obviously just the logistical piece. How do you deal with accounts closing? And what do I deal with this paperwork? How do I take care of the phone lines? All the logistics of that piece. And it felt like it was never going to end in some ways. With the benefit of time and hindsight now, I see that the grief is still there, right? The widow journey continues, but at the same time, the rest of my life has grown more. So if the circle was small before relative to the size of the grief is still there, the same size, but the rest of my life in many ways has grown around it. So that it is still sorrowful, it's still heavy, but it's not quite so immediately painful today, right? I can talk about it in a way that's not overwhelming. I can share. It's easier to reflect in that way.
If you were to speak to yourself the day after Sarah passed, and you get to maintain all of your knowledge, all of your understanding, what would you have told Daniel that day based on what you know now, 9 years later?
Yeah, I've talked a lot about the spiritual side of the journey, which is that this is a refining fire. It's a sanctifying experience, right? And that as a result of going through those sorrows, you're going to be able to experience deeper joys, higher highs, at the same time, feeling, walking alongside, empathizing, delving into those low lows, those deep, dark days, and using it as a way to help and minister to other people. I had no idea of all the conversations and the opportunities that I was going to take to learn from that pain and use it, turn it into purpose, if you will. I just assumed, okay, well, this is the way my life is, and maybe I'll muddle through, but much less taking what I'd learned and using it to help others now. Someone
listening to that early on, and they've heard pain and the purpose, or I'm going to make something good out of it. It's going to be, no, this is not pleasant. At what point in over the 9 years of traveling did that shift to become something that it is now for you?
It was at least a couple of years before that ever started to come in. Trying to remember, maybe 2, 3, 4, somewhere in there. And it was really as the community started to grow around me, or rather I got plugged into communities that were there, and getting to talk and connect with other people who've been widowed at similar stages, right? I call it the language that no one wants to speak, but you translate easily, right? It's the label that nobody expects of widow, widower, things like that, right? There's just that lived experience, common knowledge, right? That you just look over and right? Some things don't even have to be said. And so as I got to hear other people's stories, similar to how you have shared so many great stories out here, and see people just a little bit further ahead. Now, if you're sitting here listening, you're like, man, 9 years ahead, that feels really far. It would probably feel far. And certainly in those early days for me, there was no way that I was going to relate as easily to someone 9 years ahead, but it was easier to relate to somebody 6 months ahead, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And so just that next one step, or what could be happening down the road, was a little glimmer of hope of, oh, they've made it, right? And pain and purpose, whatever the catchy phrase, right? I mean, it sounds good in a soundbite now, but that's because I've told this story a few times, right? There was no catchy sound bites. There was no, thinking about that kind of stuff early on. It was an evolution of seeing myself in other people's stories.
Thank you. It sounds that your journey to continue living after Sarah's transition turned into something else. You were trying to survive your wife no longer being here. And when you talk about the community building around you, what did that look like?
For many cases, it was online communities, because again, finding other young men or women in that similar stage of life was difficult, challenging, almost impossible to find people in person. I did connect in a few conferences and things like that for people in the widowed space. But then it was really when I started working on the profession. So at the same time that I was getting out of the Air Force, in that same 2017, 2018, 2019 timeframe, I ultimately became a financial planner and launched my own firm. I did never set out to like use my lived experience as a way to connect with people, but it just started happening organically. And I started working with a lot of clients who were widows. And then I was like, oh, okay, now I can see a reason to take this and help people. Then I also went back and got some additional training and education at Kansas State University in their financial therapy program, which was very helpful for me in understanding some of the grief elements of financial anxiety that often comes along when someone is thrust into the role of household chief financial officer, that CFO role. Most couples delegate those roles, and suddenly with the loss of a spouse, you're having to do everything, right? And so that, coupled with some of the academic research that I started to look at and say, okay, this is a way to help and to serve. So again, an evolutionary process over time.
Thank you. You mentioned being in the Air Force. I know our listeners are going, what are those? I'll say certificates, but I'll let you explain the items behind you, what they represent on the first level there.
Yeah. So over here I have some of my Air Force medals and so the Air Medal for some of the campaigns and things that I participated in one of my other trophies. And I got some of my degrees over here. So some little mementos. I have some other ones. You can't see them. They're higher up here, like a tail flash and a flag that I flew and stuff like that. So that's ways to remember.
And the little figurines down there for those who are interested too. I know we talked about them during the pre-podcast conversation, but they're intriguing.
Oh yeah, my little mini Lego figurines for my Star Wars stuff. So I'm a little Star Wars nerd over here.
Thank you. The blending of your grief journey and finances puts you in a very unique role. I know from myself and other people that I've spoken with, people feel very vulnerable and an opportunity. They feel like people try to take advantage of them. What have you found in dealing with people? Are they guarded? Are they feeling that way? Or what does those conversations look like?
Yeah, it's a very common feeling, and rightly so, right? You're already so raw and feeling vulnerable. I mentioned, like in my own personal experience, of friendships drawing away. So there's an evolution in relationships, oftentimes not of your own doing. Death is just awkward subject, right? There's that taboo in many cases in our country as well, in our cultures, family of origin, money stories, upbringings, all these things start to swirl together. And you add in a little bit of dose of death, and you add a little bit of dose of money, and maybe there's estate planning or taxes, right? And all these things can get quite complicated already. So I see it all the time because there's also that element of brain fog. We've referenced a little bit of that, which is life itself becomes so difficult and challenging, right? Our nervous systems, our mental strength, our fortitude, spiritually, emotionally is just tested, stretched to the limit. And so we add a whole host of administrivia, right? Maybe that's probate. Maybe that's settling all the beneficiary accounts, right? I mean, it's a mountain of to-dos a mile long. If you don't feel overwhelmed, that'd be the rare exception. I have never encountered that personally, and much of the academic research would suggest that that's almost impossible, right? Unless you truly were managing everything ahead of time. And even then, it's still difficult because now you have grief to deal with on top of.
So for that person who has inherited these chief financial officer duties, they were not the money person in the house. It was the person that passed.
Yeah.
They have never paid the electric bill. All those things were handled. The duties in the household were divided, and the other person took that load. Is there a first step? Is there a first place that a person could start? Like, they don't know where the passwords are. They just know that everything was being done. And they loved this person. They are still grappling with the idea they are no longer on this side of eternity. And they've got to make these phone calls. They've got to repeat this statement. They've got to do all these things when they are at their lowest. Some people may have children pulling at their coattails needing things. Some people may have no children at all. But this weight of all the things that they've got to start doing. Is there a first step?
There is. And this is where support can help, right? So one of the things that academic research has shown, what we do with a lot of our clients, is kind of a triage of the list, right? There's 1,000 things to be done, or it can feel like that at times. So, how do we prioritize them into the now, the soon, and the later buckets, right? Some stuff has to be done relatively now, right? We've got to fill out some forms. We've got to deal with the funeral. Maybe there's probate that needs to get started, right? Working with an attorney, right? Starting to organize where the documents are, right? But some decisions can be postponed a little bit. If they can, how do you work through that? So if you're a checklist person, this is a great thing. Don't try to rely on your memory. Write everything down, right? Ideally, maybe you can have some friends or a family member or a close trusted confidant come alongside and help you with some of this, and just start to organize one little bit at a time. Every small little positive step that you do generates its own kind of psychological momentum, right? The whole dopamine hit when you check off that thing on the to-do list, right? I encounter this all the time with my incredibly smart, very talented, successful, professional women, whether that's primarily in the home or dealing in the workforce. And so they encounter themselves in this financial situation, and they're dealing with what ultimately turns out to also be financial anxiety. It's not just grief where it's all mingled together, but it is, I'm worried about how things are going to get paid. My money story from my past is integrating into this journey. And so many of the mental health counselors, the grief therapists, they're helping you work through the grief side of things, but oftentimes they may not have the language or the skill set to help you even articulate for yourself. A lot of what you're feeling is financial anxiety, right? The lack of confidence that comes with things. So this is where we try to do like empowerment, which is all about education and knowledge that goes along with it. One, you're an incredibly smart, capable, talented person, and you will be able to learn this. It's like I tell some of my clients, what was it like when you started riding a bike for the first time or did any kind of hard thing in your life, right? It was probably difficult at first, but with a little bit of practice, a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of support, and over time, you just got better and better. We shouldn't be surprised, or we shouldn't be having so much expectation of ourselves that suddenly when you're thrust into this role, the grief journey, everything we've talked about so far, and at the same time, you have to master this checklist a mile long and deal with all the financial stuff. Yeah, it's going to be hard. So if you start small, checklist it now, soon, and later, little by little, you're going to make more progress. And a year, 2, 3 from now, you're going to be in a much better place.
A couple of things I want to circle back to. Explain your money story.
Yeah. So a money story is kind of a phrase when we're talking about like what money was like growing up in your family of origin. Some academic research suggests that even by the age of 7, kind of your money personality or money stories is many ways hardwired, even before you ever like probably handled money a lot, maybe certainly before you earned it, maybe for household chores or things like that. So you watched, was money a source of conflict? Did it create tension? Was it a scarce resource? Was it something to not be talked about, right? That taboo kind of subject idea, right? And this is the air that you breathe, the water that you swim in, whatever kind of analogy that you want to use there. And most people are not even aware of this until you meet someone different, right? Oftentimes that's your relationships or a marriage or a spouse. And you're like, whoa, you think that about that? And so oftentimes that's that first thing of, we have very different upbringings, right? There are 4 kind of primary money scripts that have been documented by some research with Drs. Brad and Ted Klontz and Rick Kaler, who kind of look at this. They wrote a fascinating book called The Financial Wisdom of Ebenezer Scrooge, which looks at the classic Christmas Carol, Bob Cratchit, Ebenezer Scrooge, kind of illustrate some of these principles. It's an older book. It's been out for a while. It's one of the ones that I've actually loved to give to clients as a gift in the past to help understand that. But if you've never heard of it, one, don't be surprised. It's a relatively newer, fresher concept in the world of finances.
Thank you. When you say trust for finding the person to help you with this journey, why is it important to find someone you trust?
Yeah, because that's relationship capital, right? That can help you move forward at your own pace, right? And whether that's a friend, family member, a trusted professional, tax planner, financial advisor, financial planner, something like that, right? When you get the trust that's built up, right, that goes beyond just giving advice. That's about a relationship. And some things like that can only be felt, right? And some things like that can only be experienced. Because if you're dealing with financial anxiety, if you're trying to figure out what's next, if you're unsure of what to do, if you're worried about being taken advantage of, right? Those are problems that I would argue math doesn't solve, right? That's a confidence that comes from knowing that somebody has your best interests at heart. I'd also argue that's also a great place to also think about the fiduciary standard, one that exists in some elements of this profession, where they're legally, morally, ethically required to act in your best interest as a client. And so that's another way that you can boost that level of trust. Some people in this profession only operate under a lower legal standard, suitability standard, in which case they don't have to give you what's in your best interest. So it's a major distinction there, at least when it's one of the things that comes to mind when you ask about trust.
Thank you. And I want to frame the reality that you are operating in the state of Florida. And so some of the information you're giving may only be in relation to in Florida, and people need to find out specifically how it works in their state and be certain of that. So when you talk about some people work at a lower level of trust, are there certifications, validations, letters to look behind someone's name to understand this is a person? Because some people going through grief may feel like they don't have anyone that they can trust, because this person walking along this process is now going to become very aware of your financial position. What is available may not be the thing that you want to share with someone you trust as a friend, and looking for a professional that's going to give me some guidance.
Yeah, that's a great question.
That?
So obviously this is where it's going to be, unique to your situation and what you need. Are you willing to work with somebody who's meeting you in person? Are you interested or able to work with someone who has like a virtual practice and works with clients all over the US like I do? So there's a couple of things to think about. The Certified Financial Planner designation, so the CFP, their marketing language is the gold standard because they do attach a fiduciary standard to financial planning relationships. So asking if the professional that you're working with has a CFP is a helpful indicator. I also chose to run my firm the way it's called a registered investment advisor, an RIA, and all RIAs in the United States operate under a fiduciary standard to their clients. My particular method is called fee only as well. So that means I only charge fees that the client pays. There's never any commissions or there's never any kind of kickback. So it helps to reduce some of the conflicts of interest. But if you start with that FIA CFP and that RIA level, that's going to get you, 60, 70, 80% of the way there. But there's also a style element too. It's like, can you connect? Can you relate to this kind of person? There's different levels of engagement. How much services are you looking for? That's why I recommend interviewing several people to kind of get a flavor and compare and contrast.
Can you provide details on what fiduciary means to make sure they understand?
Yeah, it's a kind of a big fancy word. It gets thrown out a lot, but what it ultimately means is that the person giving you the advice, are they held to a legal standard that has liability attached to it? So when I work with clients, if I give them bad advice that's not in their best interest, they have legal standing to be able to come back and sue me and win. As opposed to somebody who's operating under the suitability standard, it's much easier for them as the professional to give bad advice. By that, I just mean like, say they sell a product that wasn't ultimately the most effective or maybe the lowest fee or the most appropriate for that situation. For the client to come back and sue the person under that lesser suitability standard, it's very, very difficult to win. Almost impossible compared to the standard of the fiduciary, which you're going to have those people in the RIA model operating under.
Thank you. I also want to circle back to make sure that people understand the difference of something you said. You mentioned two different ways in which a person could be paid for the services rendered. One could be a flat fee and one could be a commission. Can you elaborate on the difference and why a person would particularly choose one or the other for their best interest?
So with the commission-based model, there's nothing inherently wrong with it, right? That's the way many segments of our economy operate under. For instance, right, when you go to buy a vehicle, you're working with a salesman, whether that's a used or a new car. You're under no illusions when you walk into that dealership or that auto shop that, hey, they're going to try to sell you something that may or may not be suitable for you. You're not having any delusions about them working in your best interest, right? There is an inherent conflict of interest that exists there, right? So that same kind of conflict of interest can exist in segments of financial services, right? You want to go buy a product, great. You go and find it and you buy it and that commission gets paid. What the challenge comes when you have a financial advice giver who's telling you, client, to go do X, Y, and Z because it's in your best interest, right? Now, there are many extremely competent, ethical, wonderful professionals in this field who, despite earning commissions, are still operating in the client's best interest from a legal, ethical, and moral standpoint. However, it does create an issue where you, as the client, particularly dealing with brain fog and all that stuff, might not understand that fully, right? It's difficult for me as a person working in the industry who knows the terminology, who knows these relationships. So it's that much more difficult, which is why I personally have gone down the road of understanding in that compensation model where if you as the client are paying a fee, it's transparent. It's easier to understand rather than being obscured and not knowing how the levers work behind the scenes, what the implications are.
Thank you for explaining that. For the person, because this conversation, our podcast, granted, a lot of the listeners are widows or widowers, but it may be the child of someone that inherited money because their parents passed, or someone that's dealing with, I've never even had a will. I hear these words and I'm too young. I don't want to start doing all those different things. Is there a thing of being too young before you start planning financially? What would you say to that?
It's never too late to plan, right? And in fact, one of the best ways to start planning now is today, right? What's the old saying, right? If you wanted an oak tree, plant it 10 years ago, the next best time is today. I butchered that horribly, but you know what I'm saying, right?
I got it.
Do people in your life depend on you is the first question, right? You have other people who are needing it, right? We on this side of widowhood probably know that better than most, right? So we can be a message giver of helping. Hey, learn from the lessons that I've gone through on what a good plan can look like ahead of time. You referenced several of them through this conversation. Password access. Yeah, you may delegate roles and responsibilities, but do you have an awareness of where accounts are? You have a central place where kind of everything funnels together. Some of my married clients come and hire me and specifically say they want to work together so that they do have a point of contact who knows where things are, who can step in early on, whether that's you doing it with a professional or you doing it in your relationships so that those important people know where the documents are. We don't have to go on the digital treasure hunt to find all the accounts and all the logins and everything that goes on there. Password manager, password manager, password manager, especially.
What'd you say?
It's a password manager. You know, like
I don't know if they are.
1Password, LastPass, BitLocker, get something like that. I cannot stress that enough, especially in this day and age of AI, as hackers are going to get harder to beat and things like that. That way you can have strong, unique passwords across all your different logins, and you don't have to remember them because they're stored securely and something like that. And then you can give someone else access to that in an emergency kind of contact situation. The other thing that comes up here a lot is, this terminology may be new, it may be challenging, it may be different, but I guarantee you in every one of your lives, as the listeners, there's been things that have been new and challenging and different that you've tackled before. So one little bit, back to that now, soon, and later checklist, you can do it too, one little bit at a time.
What about the person that's listening to this conversation and they're like, when the person passed, I'll just call them and tell them who I am and they'll give me the password and I'll get access to everything?
No, that's not the way it works. Well, even in cases of like where you are the named beneficiary, right? There's formal procedures in place. Institutions like banks and custodians and investment companies out there, right? They have to have strong procedures in place to protect themselves and their clients from fraud, right? So it's not as straightforward and simple as that. Particularly even when you're talking about things like shutting down social media accounts or having to deal with access to utilities. So yeah, there's a lot more logistics that can go into it than you might otherwise think.
Thank you for sharing that. Question, take what you will with it. A person has a parent who has passed. The parent has no remaining spouse, but they have a lot of credit card debt. Does that child need to take on that debt for that parent and pay that? What are their options with that?
So this is where you're going to get very state specific based on the procedures in the state that your parent lived. Okay. Because some states have very specific ones. So, consult an appropriate legal authority, legal advice for it. But generally speaking, no. Credit card debt is unsecured debt. Okay. So generally does not require payment. However, the creditors, so these credit card companies can come and many times make claims against the estate. So, there's a procedure many times through the probate process for that to happen. But just because your parent left unpaid credit cards, generally speaking, does not mean that you should go out and try to pay them. Oftentimes sending them a death certificate or a copy of a death certificate is sufficient to kind of get them to drop it entirely versus moving on. Some of them may go through the process, but that's very, unique to the amount and specifics of it. Contrast that with a secured debt. Okay. So that would be like a vehicle loan or a mortgage on a house, right? Those are tied to a specific asset. Okay. So you may inherit a house or you may inherit a vehicle. Those debts do not suddenly go away, right? So those need to be satisfied. Maybe that's, if the vehicle's underwater, maybe that best option is just to let the loan company come and repossess the vehicle and take it away. Whereas if you want to keep it, that's maybe you looking at refinancing it or paying it off, similar with a mortgage in a scenario like that. So knowing the types of debt, secured versus unsecured debt like credit cards.
Thank you. In all the conversations you had, whether it is sharing your grief story with your wife or the financial story, what are the things that you feel like are missed and people don't talk about enough?
Well, we referenced it earlier, but I'll emphasize it again, is the shame that can often come from feeling like you should have it all together or feeling frustrated or overwhelmed because it's not a common language, right? Roth IRA, life insurance, estate planning, probate, will, right? These are challenging terminology. And just because it's new or different on top of everything else, it can bring up feelings of shame, especially if that's something that's interacting with your money story, your money journey, your money script from growing up. So one, like, be patient with yourself. This is a journey, right? You're going to get there eventually, especially if you have support of trusted friends or colleagues and professionals along the way. If you feel shame, if you feel overwhelm and financial anxiety, that's typical. That's to be expected. So don't feel alone in that if you're ever experiencing that.
Thank you. When you see yourself as a widower, what are some things that you feel other widowers are not really given permission and they need to know about?
There's so many interesting gender differences that exist in the space of grief, right? The stats bear it out on looking at stats of like remarriage by men versus women and or the community. So as I sought out a community early on, it was far more dominated by women than men because I felt like so many more women were open to talk about and sharing the experiences where, again, the stereotype often holds true of men suppress their feelings or don't engage in talking about it. So thankfully, I'd had some prior experiences with mental health practitioners, with dealing with the military chaplains, and the support of my church family to learn to lean in a little bit to the community. And that helped me tremendously as a widower in the journey. My experience in working with, I don't even know the number of like more than 50, 60, 70 clients at this point in time who've gone through grief. Only 3 were men, widowers, who actually wanted to reach out and talk about finances or anything like that. So it's anecdotal experience, mine only, but academic research just back it up. Men are not often as good about asking for help for whatever reason, right? And so if you are a widower who's listening to this, if you felt that, you're not alone in that too. But I can tell you personal experience in working, seeing so many of those other people that when you do ask for help, the journey gets that much easier.
Thank you for saying that because I think it's undervalued how help can really relieve a lot of pressure when you're already underneath so much water. When I like to circle back to a part of the conversation that we didn't do much justice, the weight of being the caregiver for your wife.
Yeah. That was the hardest part of this whole thing, to be honest.
Yes.
The most isolating, the most unrelenting of, day after day, week after week, month after month, and just bearing what I could not fix, right? I wanted to try to help to heal and to fix and, taking her to so many doctors and medical appointments and everything that went along with that. I mean, honestly, that was the time when I was probably in my most depressed state, is in those dark, dark days. Because it also felt like I had to do it all alone. It wasn't until later on that so much support showed up, even when Sarah was in hospice. And then after she died, that a lot of people started to volunteer for help. So the caregiving journey, honestly, was even more challenging for me than the grief journey. That also goes back to because in hindsight, I had what I would now describe as anticipatory grief. Even before I knew that she was going to die, we still held out hope for so long of that caregiving period that things would turn around. I was still grieving all of the other losses, right? We didn't go out and do adventures. We stopped traveling, right? Our circle of life in some way shrank. And my career was a part of that too. I had to give up career aspirations that I had for the military, as the life was kind of incompatible with what I needed to do to manage both. And so I withdrew, kind of got off the fast track and focused on the home front, which I never, ever regret. At the same time, all of those losses, those preemptive anticipatory losses, were accumulating where I was isolated. I didn't have community. I had withdrawn. I was putting up a facade to try to tell people that everything was fine when in fact it wasn't. So it really took that last period of hospice and then ultimately Sarah's death for me to realize I can't do this on my own. And the support that came with the community made such a difference after.
For the community that's watching someone that is a caregiver and they're putting on that front and they're saying, I'm okay, any advice on how they can insert themselves in or make themselves available and try to help?
Oh, I can think of some very specific people who showed up in those dark days where I may have said, oh, we're fine. I don't need anything, but they showed up anyway. Mm-hmm. Like one day someone just came and said, hey, I know you need your lawn cut, so I'm going to do it. And so here I was. I didn't have the extra time to do it. And at the same time, they just came and did it. Next thing I know, my grass was taken care of. Someone took care of other errands. Like they just showed up and did stuff without asking. Because so many people were like, well, what do you need? In the overwhelm or in the grief or in the, where I was at in both before and after, I don't know. I can't think of anything in the moment. But they knew my grass needed cut. They knew I needed some errands run. They knew I needed extra support. And so they just showed up and did it without asking permission. That was amazing and so helpful.
It is. Someone just to take your trash out. Like the thing that you have, it seems very basic, but to have those things done, there's so much love that you feel, so much support and care. And it makes you realize you are not alone in this very difficult situation. Yeah. You mentioned your faith. How did your faith go in this process? Was there a struggle? Was it always shining? What did that look like for you?
It never went away, but certainly in those dark, depressed days of the caregiving journey, especially in that last year or so, it was very dim. It was very dim. I never doubted God's sovereignty or even that he loved us, but it felt so distant. He felt so far away that at the time I couldn't feel. It was just so inwardly focused on where I was at. Then in those last few weeks and months of that hospice period and then the outpouring of the community and support, especially as Sarah and I kind of faced that together and knowing what was yet to come, definitely something changed in there. And it was like a spark was rekindled that had grown very dim. And in that first year or two, especially after she was gone, it was probably one of the deepest, most rich and satisfying, where I had extra time and I had extra ability to focus and just poured it into reading God's word and studying scripture and leaning into that prayer. And again, what I referred earlier, like the ability to experience the deepest highs and the lowest lows more intensely and to see a richness and a beauty in the scriptures as that Christ is the man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and to go through that. So it's certainly, just went up and down through that, but I'm grateful for it, right? That pain into purpose thing is because it made me better, because of the sanctifying influence that whole grief journey has had on me.
Thank you for sharing that, because oftentimes people feel like, I will always feel this way. I will always feel this low. Nothing will ever be different for me. For the person that is struggling and they're listening to this conversation and they're in that low and they're thinking, I don't want anything to do with God. He disappointed me. My life did not turn out the way I expected. And you bumped into this person in the grocery store and they start pouring this out. What would you share with them?
I would try to hold space with them at first, just like to take the heaviness alongside, to sorrow and mourn with them, to weep with those who weep, and not try to leap in with anything at the beginning, right? Try to do that grieve with those who grieve idea, and then see where they were at with what they need beyond that, right? And that might just be a steady, encouraging presence of showing up, right? Sitting in the room with them. Too often, I found before this experience, was too quick to preach rather than to, pause. Oftentimes, even my own experience that I shared, it was not that I didn't know the truth. I did. It just felt so far away. Kind of like the experience of Job's friends, right? They showed up and they were commiserating with him for a little while, and then they got tired of that and they started just kind of berating him a little bit. Like, let's be the ones who sit there longer and listen more and maybe even talk less, especially in those early, dark, hard days.
That is solid advice. That is solid advice to people who are supporting grievers. You mentioned earlier that often may say the wrong thing. Silence is golden.
Yes. Yeah. The other thing I often say, or that, the whole, what's the colloquialism? I'm so sorry. Right. And I know people mean well, but being on the other side, I'm sure you've seen this too, Dina, is like you hear it over and over again and just it numbs you. It loses its effect. Right. I like to replace sorry with sad. I'm so sad with you. Right. Because it's expressing.
With you.
I'm so sad
not
with
for you, but with you.
Yeah. So that's one of the phrases I like to say, or like mourning with you in your sorrow, right? So reaching down with them, because words do have impact, especially when it's real, when it's empathetic, when it's driven by trying to care. So if you're one of those people who is trying to figure out what to say, try that. I'm so sad with you. I'm mourning with you in your sorrow, rather than just the classic, I'm so sorry. Because what am I supposed to say back to you? I'm so sorry. Well, I'm sorrier. I don't know. Right? It not opening up for a conversation many times. So try that. It might be working better.
That is good. You and I are both 9 years into this journey. Literally just a year and a half ago, I received some documentation that I needed to resolve about my husband's passing. I thought I was done with everything. And I was like, really? Stuff still comes up. So people feel like you're 9 years out, you're having a life and you're doing things. Does grief still become something that is activated in your life after everything that you've gone through?
Yes, 100%. It's the triggers. Sometimes out of the blue too, even at this stage, like the smell of the perfume that she used to wear. Smells can be so powerful. Like, when I smell even like hazelnut coffee, I think of my grandmother because that's what she had, So the olfactory senses have a specific brain pathway that can be extremely powerful and triggering. So that's happened recently. The other thing is, so in my work with grievers and people, right, oftentimes their story will touch on elements of mine, or just in general, just that heaviness that comes with meeting people where they're at in their grief. Reminds me of some of the Air Force training that I did back in the day about like the different pillars of strength: emotional, spiritual, physical, mental, emotional, right? And so for me, knowing ahead of time that if I'm going to be working in this space, talking to people who are grieving, right? What can I do ahead of time so I can go in well rested, not stressed about other things, haven't eaten a good lunch, right? The basics of life so that you can lean in, you can meet people where they're at in a different way. But at the same time, also finding space. So like if I'm working with a grieving client, I make sure to give myself a little space on the back end in case it was particularly intense. So I don't have to rush 5 minutes from that meeting straight into the next one without the opportunity to step back and process, right? This is some of the work that therapists have done for a very long time, which is self of the therapist. We're trying to apply it now in the financial advice world, self of the planner, which is an understanding of yourself. You do your self work first. Various phrases that kind of describe it, like you can't take clients further than you've been willing to go yourself. That same idea, right? So taking the time to have the introspection, the time to think, process, grieve, mourn, do that kind of stuff gives you the space so that you can then go out and reach. You can't pour from an empty cup. At the same time, right? Praise God, the Holy Spirit gives us everything that we need to be able to do that. But understanding where you're at, what your kind of specific triggers are, and then building in those buffers or strengthening those pillars that we talked about so that you can help people without getting so dragged down every time that you can't bounce back.
Wow. Daniel, this conversation, I mean, a lot of people, the two things you deal with are the things that people try to steer away from. People don't like to talk about money, or they don't like to talk about death. And you are finding a way to put those both together to be able to serve people.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about quite a bit. Have we covered all the things that you thought that you wanted to have in this discussion?
Maybe let's focus on a little bit about like how we integrate life and using the resources, the time, the talent, the treasure, right? So for those of us on this side of eternity, right, we have the ability to be wise stewards. That's why I named my company Wise Stewardship, to talk about this, right?
Okay.
Because money is just a tool, right? It can be used for good. It can be used for not good, evil, right? And oftentimes we put too much emphasis on the dollar part of it and less on the hopes, the fears, the dreams, the values, the goals that we can use it to help build the kingdom, to honor our late spouse, to take care of our loved ones, right? So when you start from a philosophical standpoint, whether that's me as the advice giver, the planner, working with clients, or you in your own life and kind of set your core values, your goals, when you understand what's important to you, and praise God, I mean, grief is an amazing clarifying filter, right? On this side of loss of Sarah, it helped me understand what is important and what is not, right? To let aside some of those annoyances that might have frustrated me so much beforehand, to think more about like the long view, the eternal view, like the work that I get a chance to do with clients. And now in my life now, I'm remarried, my wife Anna, our boys, our church, our neighborhood, our community, being able to invest in them, right? That is the driving factor that then allows us to reorder everything else behind the scenes, how much we save, where we invest, how we spend, how we give, right? So when you approach from that standpoint, everything else becomes clear, right? What's the saying? When the vision is clear, decisions are easy. The same thing can apply in this realm of money. So often we live in a very materialistic culture. And so very often it can be easy just to pick up the same habits, more, right? Never enough, kind of the idea, especially in the realm of money and finances. So I'm grateful. My experience personally, and then working with clients, is grief is a clarifying fact. It helps challenge some of the pre-built assumptions about what matters and what doesn't. So when you can take those valuable lessons learned and then apply them to the realm of finances in your own life and helping to teach and train other people in those two, that can set legacies that are on very, very dramatically different pathways of what's important and how to use money as a tool for that rather than money kind of being in the driver's seat.
I'm so glad I asked you that question to circle back to that. I can relate to that wholeheartedly, the clarifying part of that. And I wish it would have come a different way, but it did. And absolutely, I would agree with that. If someone wanted to work with you, how do they contact you?
So the best way would go to my website, Wise Stewardship FP for financialplanning.com. I have a lot of resources, things to learn about it. We work with clients all over the US, so a virtual relationship. Generally, you need to be interested in using technology, so things like Zoom, Google Drive, things like that. So if that's not something that you're comfortable with, might not be the best fit. But we'd love to help. Most of our clients are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, dealing with kids somewhere in the picture. And again, stepping into that household CFO role for the first time. So that sounds like you. We'd love to be a help. And if we're not the right fit, we can help refer you to someone who could be.
Thank you. I try to give my guests the opportunity to be the podcaster. So any questions that you may have of me?
Well, I love what you built here, Dr. Tina, because you built a community that is focused on taking service, right? So when you think about some of the topics that we talked about today, like that money story integration and using money as a lens, as a filter on this side of grief, what stands out to you in all the conversations that you've had with guests on this podcast? What have you seen where people use their time, talent, and treasure to make a different impact on this side of grief?
That's a good question. In fact, not one I've ever been asked. I will leverage the work that we do and how different people have come alongside of us and what that would look like. I have a podcast conversation with someone and they may have thought that this was just about having a podcast. And then they find out, oh, you have a program called Children of Widowhood Secret Santa, where we work to support children who have lost one or both parents and get them Christmas gifts in December. Because even though it would be great if everyone was fiscally responsible or had a plan, you know the statistics better than myself. The majority of people are not financially prepared for the passing of a spouse. And if it's the spouse that was the money provider, then it's even more of a devastating thing. So I had 2 widows come to me and say, we've identified some widows in the community that are going to struggle this year for Christmas. How can we help them? And so our board allowed us to have a program, and people came alongside of us, organizations, individuals, and made sure that those children had Christmas gifts. We were able to create anonymous Amazon wish list, post it on our website, and people went and purchased. It started first year with 7 families. Last year we had 11 families. We had 29 children. Wow. They were allowed to pick 5 gifts each, and people were purchasing gifts for them. It went to their home. No one knew who they were and kept their privacy. Another thing that we have done, actually, we have a gala coming up May 16th called Hope Grows Here, where we are creating an opportunity for people to come alongside of us to create an education fund. Because going back to the idea that if people are not prepared economically, it doesn't mean the hurt doesn't exist. And so someone now may need to go back and obtain a livable wage, which requires them to have more education, pick up a trade, or maybe the children were in college or being educated, and now that ability to do that has ceased. So for people come alongside of us going, okay, I see the need there. I'm a breast cancer survivor. I see a lot of stuff for breast cancer awareness. I see a lot of stuff for veterans. You and I both served in the military. Yeah. Very low numbers on supporting widows and widowers. And when you see an opportunity to be able to say, that is a community that relates to me, and I want to be able to serve that community. We have a memorial garden that we're starting in the area that has a mean income of about $65,000. And why that is important, if I'm making $65,000 annually, I probably don't have time to take off from work and sit in my emotions or to do it. I'm having to get up and go to work as I'm actively grieving because there are things that I need to pay for and I'm struggling in this economic world. So people coming alongside of us to be able to create that memorial garden where people can come to that space, and then also potentially have coffee with a mental health professional, because that may be the only time for free for someone to speak with them. So there are different people that come alongside of us, mental health professional coaches, that allow us to work pro bono with people to send to them, because everyone doesn't have health care, but they are struggling mentally. So those are ways that I've seen after conversations that I've had with people for them to come along with the services that we provide and be able to help other people.
So special. Wow. What a way that people have taken their experiences in this grief journey and leaned in to make a difference.
Exactly. Thank you. Any other questions?
No, I'm so grateful to get a chance to have a conversation today. I hope it was a help to the listeners.
I think so. I would like to allow you the opportunity to close out this conversation with any final thoughts or maybe things we didn't cover, and for our listeners. Yeah.
So we've referenced a lot of the ideas of the grief journey. It's that roller coaster of emotions, right? There's high highs, there's low lows, there's opportunities to take it and grow. So wherever you're at, whether you're early or later in this journey, know that you're not alone, right? There's people out there who have walked the road similar to you. Even though every grief journey is unique, right? You can hopefully gain some wisdom and inspiration. And then when the time is right, at the right place, the right way, with the right people, you will have a chance to take what you've learned to be a help, to be a blessing, to be an encouragement to others. I'm so thankful that many, many people have done that for me along the way, continue to do that for me. And I hope this is a way I chance to get it, to pay it back and to pay it forward.
Daniel, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending another episode with Widowhood Real Talk. If you found the contents of today helpful, share the episode to anyone you know who may need it. Subscribe to the show and tune into Widowhood Real Talk each week. Then, Visit widowhood-realtalkwithtina.org to join the community and access additional resources. Remember, you are not alone in this journey.